And we're live. Welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school beyond the academic research and that may be a bit more difficult to talk about in our day to day. I'm your host, Linda Corcoran, and I'm currently completing a master's in food science in Ireland. And for PhD Balance, I'm the Grad Chat lead and a Twitter coordinator. If you like what you see here, be sure to check out the rest of our YouTube channel and also our podcast hosted on Anchor FM for more grad chats. And don't forget to subscribe for notifications about when we go live. Our topic today is power abuse and restorative justice, and I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Marta Oliveira. During Marta's PhD in Berlin, she crossed paths with the sexual harassment victim, and that fueled her energy to engage in mental health advocacy and organizational change. Her focus is on prevention and tackling of power abuse and improving the lives of graduate students and survivors of harassment and power abuse. Currently, she works with Dragonfly Mental Health and also consults herself with universities and scientific institutions to help them improve their culture. So welcome, Marta. We're so pleased to have you on Grad Chat to discuss your experiences.
Hi, Linda. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, I guess we will dive right in. It's a super important topic. Why I know you have permission to share your friend's story, so why don't we start with that?
So for the purpose of the story, I can use the name Jane right now. So I met her when we started our PhD, and in Berlin, here in our institute. And essentially, I barely saw her for this whole time, for 3 years, actually. And during this time, she was working with a postdoc that was doing, starting slowly with some comments, like annoying comments about how beautiful she was, or like how she looked like related to clothes or appearances. And it turned, during the 3 years, it increased in severity. She, of course, was uncomfortable, but it wasn't that bad in the beginning, So that's the feeling that she had in the beginning. And then it culminated with more annoying comments, to the point that there was some advance. There was a physical advance that she didn't want to. So at that point, she was very clear and said, "No, what you're doing." And also at that point, she realized it was sexual harassment the entire time. After 3 years, it was hard to have that idea. And then she tried to get help from different people at the institute, and she couldn't really get what she needed, and nobody knew what to do and how to help her. At that point, she went to their supervisor, and the supervisor decided that the postdoc was actually the biggest asset of the lab, really. So she decided to sort of support the postdoc, and there was a lot of comments that I remember, such as, "You're going to ruin his career if you tell something about him," or like, "Why, I've also been there, just toughen up, it's fine," comments like that really hurt her. And from that point on, actually, Jane was morally harassed by the supervisor, who tried to just kick her out of the group, just creating an environment that she couldn't come to work. And indeed, she was in a sick leave for 2 months. And when she came back, she brought a lawyer. And that was the point that we also met her. And we were, oh my God, I remember hearing the story and knowing that this happened next to me in the institute where I'm working, and that we started at the same time. So it could have actually happened to me, if there was nothing that was that different. So it was really, really interesting to experience this feeling and to really be angry, but then use it for something. And so we organized many of our students to ask for more from the directors for an acknowledgement that this was happening, and that we wanted it to be changed. We wanted it to be improved because we didn't feel safe. And at that point, actually, the director said, for our surprise, they said, "Oh, we totally screwed up. That's you're 100%. You're right. You're right. So we're sorry. We don't know how to do better at the moment, but we will. And then they invited us to integrate a task force. And I think there we were completely, we really didn't expect this reaction from directors. We were expecting to have to do a petition or, and get everybody involved and do a lot of like bottom up trying to convince them to do something. And they immediately said, no, actually just come with us and help us redesign the institute. And that's what we did at that point. So just to also make a transition, before going there into what we did, I want to say that in this case, Jane then experienced two types of power abuse. That was first the sexual harassment between also a postdoc and her, a PhD student, but then also in form of bullying and more moral harassment, like more twisted and mind games and like making sure that people were talking, like they were not including her in projects and like it was really twisted at that point from the supervisor of both of them. So that's also how power abuse can look like.
Yeah, and that unfortunately is not an uncommon story in academia. It's terrible still to hear it, but I wish it was the only one I'd heard. Mm-hmm. I guess sexual harassment is rampant, but power abuse is even more prevalent, and it is something that is definitely not talked about. So I guess you gave two examples of power abuse, but do you have a good definition of power abuse for people to kind of, I guess, get it together in their minds?
Yeah, so this would be the misuse of a position of power for personal and professional gain. In this case, in the professional environment, usually professional gain, at the expense of the person, of the victim, right? And the consequences of power abuse are usually that the victim's mental health gets affected. This could mean, anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. These are the typical associated mental health issues that are associated. And and with that, and also, of course, the motivation for working and the creativity also drops, obviously. I mean, also if the mental health is affected. And normally also the group dynamic is affected. So all of this is a little bit included also in the definition of power abuse, the consequences. And the most interesting thing, though, for me in the definition of power abuse is that it has nothing to do with actual intention. So it could be subconscious, it could be a bias, could be it doesn't have to connect with some malicious thought. So it could just be how the person perceives it. That's actually the main point of that we use for the definition of power abuse.
Yeah, that's I think that's a really important distinction to make, that it doesn't have to be intentional and it can still be power abuse, because I guess when we're talking about academia, we're talking about a massive hierarchy where a couple of people have all the power, and it's pretty much dependent on your supervisor for your career if you want to stay in academia.
Yeah, absolutely. There's dependency on to finish the PhD or to finish the postdoc or to finish the paper. There's always something that needs to be finished that doesn't exist at all if you leave it in the halfway or some. So it's something. It's the dependency is so high, and it usually doesn't happen like this in most jobs. And then you also have other added factors, like if you want to stay in academia, for example, then you have the higher dependency of wanting that you keep a good relationship and the letter of recommendation, which for people that then want to leave or be in industry, it's a bit easier. But then on top of that, there's also people that live abroad or even overseas and would need to stay longer for the visa. So that's even a higher dependency that usually makes people tolerate a lot of misbehaviors.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of culture change that's needed and a lot of policy change as well, in the way that academia functions. And I guess one important question would be, how can people recognize power abuse that's going on, whether it's themselves or a friend? How can you know, other than, because like you said, sexual harassment we've all been conditioned to be like, oh, but it's just a comment, it's fine.
Yeah.
How do you catch it?
Yeah. So there's some work that you can do on your own, actually. So just like, if you definitely need to be a bit in tune with yourself, meaning that in moments that you receive certain comments or there's this click sometimes that you just feel like, that was weird, like there's something weird about this. And for me, this is sort of like the red flag, or typically what already signals like there's something in this direction that is not right. And it's very complicated to explain at that point, but at that point I would already draw a line. If it feels weird, if it feels off, that's where I would draw the line. Even if it doesn't mean that you report immediately, it doesn't mean that you have to call it and like confront like this, like, okay, no, just like step by step, it's just, if it was one time, you take it seriously, listen to your body. If it was off, then it's like, address it. Like, it's important that you address it. You don't have to do it super quick, but definitely address it. And normally when these things happen, it starts always like tiny, like, and then it will grow and escalate. And it's the easiest action point is still when it just feels weird and off. And I really recommend people to, at that point, if you have like a first contact point in the university, or also a therapist would be already great to decompress it. But like, actually, even with the university, this would be important, because it's just already the first point that you can say there's something wrong. And then if it increases, then you can also go again and be like, okay, there's certainly something now. And this is a bit different also for the university to help intervene way earlier. This is a completely different deal than when it escalates. When it escalates, it's really hard for everyone to, like, of course, for the victim, but also for everyone to find a solution. So as early as possible, when it feels wrong, it's because it's wrong. Just listen to yourself, and that's when the border starts, the boundary. It's there.
Absolutely. I guess another important question is that we got asked in the chat is, do you have any tips for how you'd recognize someone might be a power abuser? Obviously, that's a very difficult question, because academia likes to protect any abusers as long as they're bringing in grants. And that is a big cultural change shift that would need to happen. But is there any, I guess, tips or questions that you've come across that you can use to talk to potential advisors, anything like that?
Well, I would try and ask the people in the group before I would go. And I would, I don't know, I would see also how tense people are, how honest people are about things. If they are also super extremely positive, like usually it's not always positive. So even in groups that work super well, there's always negative things. So I would say that if people only say really good things or avoid answering directly to questions, that's for me a bit of a red flag. Also, for example, if you like ask for specific like minimums that you like to work, like I find it really, really nice when people have conversations also from the bottom up, that without having that hierarchy. So before you start, you can always ask, what's the policy of working on the weekends and stuff like that. And then you also see what what they respond. I think if they say, it's up to you, then you get a bit, okay, not sure what that means. Like maybe get a follow-up or ask more of the team. If there's like a culture that you should go, but it's not completely necessary and not everybody does it, that's okay. But if it is like everyone is going and people don't feel that they have an option, not really okay. I think it's really complicated and depends of different power abuse types, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's no right answer when it comes to trying to identify good advisors, good departments. It's very difficult to always ask the right questions. And even sometimes you can still ask the right questions and you might not get the right answers.
Absolutely. And it can always happen that they tell you something that is not completely true. That's also why I would then notice like more body language and how tense people are and how stressed. Definitely that's a good indication, and how honest it can be really if they say something negative, but like it's, I don't know, but it's something that they manage. It's like if they say, for example, when a department has an indication of, okay, there was a sexual harassment case, but we dealt with it and people talk about it, well, that's a super cool, like that's a great indication that this is a good place, because normally what would happen is that this is happening everywhere. So if people don't talk about it and they have no idea that this is happening, it's usually because it's a super taboo topic. It's not because it's not happening. So actually this could also be interesting if people know about any cases, like if to know more on the institute level, like have they heard about anything, what is the institute policy about this, and what's the department, all of that, what is the support on, I don't know, is there therapy, is like all of these little questions will help you understand how much of a taboo this topic is or not, or if they are doing something about it. I think that would also be a good indication.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I guess moving on to the second part of this chat, which is what you actually did in your case, is that you created a restorative justice platform.
No, it wasn't exactly that. Sorry, it
Okay.
was a task force that was composed by a diverse team of people, and we were essentially making a code of conduct. So it was a guidelines, like a booklet that would define all the misbehaviors that we thought it was important to address, and then would also talk about the responsibilities of the directors, of the employer, of the employees, and of the supervisors also, for example, and also define our values as an institute, like stuff like that, and consequences, what would happen to people that misbehave. So this was our first product, and then we defined a list of policies and measures that were taken in terms of could be leadership trainings, for example, and there were many. It was a list of like 50 things that we asked for the institute. I can also go and I can talk about this a bit more. And then we also redesigned the sort of escalation system. So what happens when there's a case that there is a way for people to complain, so that there's an office or several offices that would have this responsibility of taking the complaints and know what to do from there. And this we had to completely redesign because it just wasn't working well for the victims. Well, it wasn't working for the institute nor for the victims, but especially not for the victims. It's just that when institutes don't really usually think from the user perspective. They will more think like, we have to provide this because we are liable for this, so we redesigned this completely to focus on well-being of the victim and safety of the victim first. And that was the most important thing. And unfortunately, we didn't go so far as restorative justice, but it is one of my like sort of ideas of moving forward, because it's just yeah, it is an interesting process that would include a mediation between the perpetrator and the victim, to sort of heal a bit and like allow for a lot of feelings, communication, and that would the community would then be able to heal all together. And that's very interesting, but I didn't go that far, unfortunately. It's some other project.
You still did so much. Like it's absolutely amazing work, very much needed, but like especially considering like I know it was an entire task force, but like any movement in any direction to make culture change, to make actual tangible movement in how academia functions and to help make it better, especially for grad students, is so important. It's so essential.
Yeah, no, thank you. I agree. And for us, I mean, it's crazy because at that point I really didn't think this was that they were going to listen to us, really. So then actually having been given the chance was really amazing. But also we also worked for them, for free. So there's also that side. I think it was an extremely learning process. And I also have to say, at that point, I was 3 years in my PhD, so also not completely done, but it was an amazing experience to have some feeling of accomplishment, because you know how science, I'm an experimental biologist, and it was just so frustrating at that point. So it was a great way of also like, so that felt less frustrating than my experiments. That's what I mean. So in a way, was really good for me and for my sense of like, I'm doing something good that is helping someone in the long run, and people like me, like me, like a few years ago, or starting PhD. So that was super motivating, and it gave me a lot to work like this. And I really encourage, if people are in this situation and they can even work a little bit towards something. It doesn't have to be a lot, but that's, cumulatively we will push, and we will get results that we need.
Yeah, and I guess another important question. Obviously, you're based in Germany. When people think sexual harassment, they usually think US and Title IX. That doesn't exist in Europe. So, what is the reporting process like in Germany, or in your institution anyway?
So how it was essentially, there was an equality officer that is like a person that has a PhD, like kind of like us, like a scientist, that became an equality officer at some point, and they don't quite know, or didn't have a lot of training about this, and they will be the first points of contact. So typically there's some points of contact, and this person would be one, and typically the one that is expected to get most of the complaints. The reality that we saw is that, for example, PhD students don't want to go to an official office to complain. They want to complain, or at least it can be an official office, but it has to be someone that they've already seen, or it's not such high jump, to talk to someone that they have no idea who they are. So yeah, typically there's a few of these, but they have quite some official like standpoint, and there's some barrier to report. And yeah, I think essentially that's how it starts. And then there is an escalation that is usually not done. So this person usually has no power. They can rarely do anything, and they only need to report if the person wants to. But then they report directly to the director. So it's a very like dysfunctional, like it doesn't work very well the way that it is. And the way we made it was, for example, we increased the number of points of contact and made it as diverse as possible, so that there would be people that, of all types of shapes and colors, and would Also genders, like this is super important so that people also feel a bit, I don't know, more comfortable, with whoever they choose. Then these people need absolutely to be trained. Like this is the most important thing. Like you need to do a proper training on not only the legal aspects of this, also for themselves to be protected themselves. And then once you're protected, you also know your sphere of action, like where, like how far can I go, like where, like what does it mean also to be confidential, like how much can I share of this, because to some extent they also need to share the cases between points of contact so that they, it's also not okay that it's in a single person receiving all this information that has to decide what happens, so there also makes sense that there's some meetings between them where they can talk about this, but it has to be anonymous. And what does it mean? Like, how do they do that? And also in empathy, obviously, active listening, because they can be many of the cases they will just receive without without people wanting to report. So they will just listen for a while. And that's also super important. That's actually extremely, extremely important for the victim, that there is someone on the other side that will listen. So they need to be trained. I don't recommend anyone to visit anyone that is not trained. I prefer no reporting system to someone that is not trained for this role. And then if you decide to if the victim decides to report, which I only think is appropriate for the victim or good for the victim after this person is not in danger anymore, actually. So they need to be removed from danger, possibly through sick leave or, I don't know, vacation for a while or something like that. And then regain strength, and then you can, or the victim can consider to report. And I think that's where you are a bit then more solid and can take the point of having to write everything down and explain the story over and over again, which is pretty, can be re-traumatizing. So that's why I'm, having this little, it's important to be careful. And then once it goes to that point, that usually I recommend that, PhD officers or even other PhD students that were previously trained can be that role. And then they will also escalate once there is a complaint. They will escalate to other offices that have that role, particularly like the Equality Office, or typically here in Germany, it's the Staff Council. So the workers, how do you call this? I don't know how do you call this in English? Like Staff Council would make sense to you?
I guess it would sort of be a council, yeah.
Yeah, like in your organization, when there's an official body that actually has meetings with the directors quite often, and they at least in Germany they have quite some power, and they also legally have some maneuver possibilities. So they are definitely one of the best tools we have. And then there's also the complaints office for specifically discrimination topics, so like sexual harassment would fit there, and they have to act super quick in cases of discrimination. They have like even 1 month to do a consequence, to write a consequence to the abuser, actually. And if they prescribe that, they it's out somehow. So this has to happen quite fast. And it's obviously a challenge. This is of course all for Germany here. And it's a challenge to get the university like this, that it works quite well, but that's what we tried to do. And only after this point, there's a council that will sort of decide and acknowledge that what happened, will listen to all parties, including witnesses, and they're including the directors are only involved in the decision, like when there's already a decision, and then the directors have the sort of hierarchy, or like will give the consequences themselves. But this is now went sort of high up in all the escalation, because if it would be a very complicated case, usually you want to catch cases as early as possible, as low threshold, just weird feelings, conflicts of interest is super common. Like that's where you want to catch all cases, and there you wouldn't need to escalate.
Absolutely. It's very important. Obviously, that's where we'd like to get. That's not really where we are at the moment. People can feel very conflicted in even reporting small things, for being told that they're being overdramatic, or that they're just going to ruin someone's career and reputation, even though that doesn't really happen over a small thing. But that's where we would like to be in the future, where we are catching, but we'd obviously like there to be no abuse whatsoever of any kind.
Yeah, no, we need to work in parallel on both sides, because it's on one side you need to train people on how to not do that. Like, it's apparently very not explanatory. But at the same time, I also understand, because academia is such a stressful place, that if you don't manage the stress well, this, it will project it. And this, I've also seen people that I considered, I don't know, I thought I would understand them, and they are nice people, and they were also doing at some point behaviors that I would already not, I wouldn't be comfortable receiving that kind of behavior, for example. So I definitely recommend, or what I can tell, at least for me, that it was always important to remember this idea that they are not trained to deal in with the situations. Like, they barely had leadership trainings. Like, if they had, it was like a few hours that they had to go there. And, they don't quite know, like leaders, like supervisors don't quite know exactly how to supervise you, how to lead you. Leadership is barely a concept, actually. So I would try that, that people also get a bit more empowered, and take care, of course, if it's safe, that they take care and take ownership of their projects and a bit of their freedom inside the group, if possible.
Yeah, it's so important, and definitely the lack of training is, I think, something that needs to be addressed in academia, all across the board. Doesn't matter what the real training or what the topic of the training is, there's more training needed pretty much everywhere. But yeah, so I guess I know that you're helping different universities, different departments get a better system on going up and running, get better policies. So can you give us a couple of examples of what you are doing, or is it kind of a similar to what you did in your university itself?
Yeah, it's a little bit similar, but it's smaller projects. So this one was just a huge project that we got to do a lot. And now when I'm a bit more spread out, I can sort of take smaller parts of it. Also because for a university, like universities will be all slightly different. So even if an institute doesn't have that much in place, what usually happens is that that point is like a very interesting place, because it's like, I have no idea where to start. And then I help them, okay, then what would be not only necessarily the priorities, because this, I can have my own priorities, but I also have to help them with, for example, how can they convince directors to get them more budget about this, for example, and what would be the easier steps for you? Because even if it's not maybe if I could say, okay, if I would have 100% like perfect budget, then you would definitely do this first. But sometimes it's not like that. So it's rather like, what's the next step that you can do that would also help a lot the students? So like sort of get a good balance between effort and gain from the students. And so I help a lot consulting at that stage. And then we identify, okay, that would be an important point. So let me help you get there. For example, the reporting systems is one of the ones that I'm interested in. And there's one project that we will have a meeting with all the points of contact that are appointed, and just have a feeling for like, what is this, how is it for everyone? Is like, do we want everyone to become one, or like, should we just like choose now a few? Like, do we make it, and we send these ones for training, you know, we make it well, rather than just that's how it was and we don't question it, right? So, and we make now an escalation like map, like a roadmap that would help them also feel a bit safer in like knowing what they can do. So that would be number one. Then also communicating. If you're doing something like this, you need to communicate to your employees, because it's important that they see this is now changing and for the better. So, you know, so that people also regain a bit of trust. So this is also something I help. Then I'm also giving talks, and this way is more towards the students, but not only, there's also postdocs, and there it's more about community, but also it's a space where people can talk a lot about this. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about with this topic. So the space is usually taken, and yeah, and I hold the space. I can, yeah, not only give my advice, but actually it's just sometimes listening is super important, and that the community listens to the stories. So this is also super relevant, that there is a discussion that is even brought in by the institute. So that was also yeah, a policy that we asked for, is like there's more talks that would bring up topics like this, because otherwise it just feels uncomfortable. Nobody is debating it, right? So yeah, those are a few examples.
Yeah, that's great, amazing work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's definitely needed. I would love to say that it's not needed, that we don't need these reporting systems, but we do. And making sure that they are functional and that they think about the victim and what they are going through is so important. And also just in general, educating people, because it can be so difficult when you are in a system to see the problems in it, especially when you've been there for a while. Everything kind of just becomes the norm, accepted, and that can definitely be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's the two sides of this. Is one side, usually on the victim side, you just internalize it. You're just like, you know, I deserve it somehow. That's the typical abuse victim, right? That you just internalize everything and you're like, I did something wrong. I did something to deserve this ultimately. And that's just not the case. There was nothing you should have done different. That's it's such a twisted system. And it's done, it's like everything is sort of done so that, not everything is sort of done, but the pressure is so huge, and the way the system is settled is really easy to create these problems, and it's nothing to do with little actions that actually led to that. So that's the first thing, is that people internalize it a lot, and they also have this like merit system. So it's like, you know, I'm supposed to be this elite in this elite university things. It's such a privilege, such like a genius place, you know. It's like, it's very unhealthy way of seeing academia, but that's also how we see it usually. And then people also feel like extremely guilty that they should be in this place, and then this is happening to them. So it doesn't fit quite. Yeah, and it feels very uncomfortable. But also for the supervisors, and also for, you know, neighbors, like people that see and watch, and like witnesses, that you also normalize it. But actually there's really a window of opportunity here, because you can also reach the victim after it happened, maybe not immediately after, like whenever you feel safe afterwards, and acknowledge what happened. Because if you say, you know, I saw what happened, I'm really sorry, this was not okay, you know, are you okay? This will also block a bit of the, this is just how academia is, or this is, which then also gets imprinted in our minds. And if you also just get this kindness word, it also just blocks a bit of all the stiffness. It softens a bit, and if you offer help, that's already like, you know, changing a bit of the immediate culture. It's like everything is very local, like so it's quite if they are surrounded by other colleagues that will do the same, it's like if it's the culture, they will also do more. Yeah, so I think it's important how we shouldn't normalize, and just educating everyone, and that's you also check in with yourself. Like, if instead of thinking of how is everyone else like doing, and how just pointing fingers, and it's always very easy, just like check in a bit, like listen like a bit with your own body, check a bit how you're dealing with your neighbors. Are you being kind? That's all part of the culture. If everyone is super competitive and really mean to each other, that's for sure not going to be the most the place where a power abuse for sure won't happen. So yeah, then let's rather try and stop normalizing it.
Absolutely. I think that's I think a very important point to end on. So unfortunately we are out of time, but before we end, is there anything else you'd like to mention? Is there anything else you'd like to get across?
Yeah, just actually, just so that it's a little bit more positive, I want to finish that. Also, I didn't mention that Jane, she actually finished her PhD. So there was my friend who got sexually harassed, if you forgot by now, and she was hosted by a different professor that really was fundamental and an ally actually of what she was going through, and she was so brave. She explained everything to everyone, and she had no shame anymore at that point, or she had it, but she knew that being open helped her going above that, and helped her with that. And she finished the PhD there, and so that worked out okay. She didn't stay in academia though, but I want to say that in the end this was good. And also that I'm so happy that I got to do this that I transformed something like that into something very valuable.
Absolutely. I think that's it's fantastic that she did get to support from a different advisor, did finish her PhD, and it's great that even though it's a terrible situation and it would be great if it hadn't happened, it's great that you did take it and make very important change. So I guess to end on that note, we want to thank you at PhD Balance for being an amazing guest. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your experiences, about your friend, and about how you're trying to make academia better for everyone. So this has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. We go live every Saturdays, usually at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. If you like what you see here, make sure to subscribe for notifications and check out our podcast hosted on Anchor FM and available on all major streaming platforms. Until next time.